We got married yesterday. That was all she said. No smile in her voice. No pause for breath. Just those 4 words dropped into the space between us like a plate shattering on tile. I remember standing there with my phone pressed to my ear, the grocery bags cutting into my fingers, a carton of eggs slipping loose because my hands had gone numb. The late afternoon sun was coming through the kitchen window, lighting up the dust in the air, making everything look softer than it felt. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. Yesterday, I repeated, my voice thin, almost polite. I'm sorry, sweetheart, yesterday? Yes, she said. Yesterday. I don't know what I expected after that. Laughter, maybe. An apology. Some explanation that would make it all make sense. But instead, there was just silence. Heavy. Awkward. The kind of silence that tells you the conversation is already over, even though your heart is still racing to catch up. I thanked her for telling me. I don't know why I did that. Old habits, I suppose. Years of teaching myself to stay calm, to keep my voice steady even when something inside me is cracking. I told her I hoped they were happy. I told her congratulations. My tongue formed the words automatically, like muscle memory. When the call ended, I stood there staring at the phone, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. The eggs had broken on the floor. Yellow yolk was spreading slowly, mixing with clear white, seeping toward the edge of the rug. I didn't move to clean it up right away. My son was married, and I hadn't been there. Before all of this, my life was quiet, predictable in a way I used to complain about but later learned to cherish. I'm the kind of woman who wakes up early, even on days I don't have to. The house feels different before the rest of the world gets loud. I make my coffee the same way every morning. 2 scoops, no sugar, a splash of milk, and sit at the kitchen table while it's still hot enough to fog my glasses. My son, Daniel, is my only child. I raised him mostly on my own after his father passed away, when Daniel was 10. It was just the 2 of us in that small house with the creaky stairs and the back door that never quite closed right. We grew up together, in a way. I learned how to be strong because I had to. He learned how to be gentle because he watched me try. Daniel was never the kind of boy who slammed doors or raised his voice. Even as a teenager, when the world feels sharp and unfair, he stayed soft around the edges. He'd sit at the counter while I cooked dinner, telling me about school, about the girl he liked, about the job he hoped to get someday. I listened. I always listened. When he met Lila, he was 32. He called me that night, his voice brighter than I'd heard it in years. Mom, he said, I think I met someone important. I smiled into the phone, already picturing it. Important how? Like, future important. Lila came into his life quickly, but not in a reckless way. She was polite when we met, a little reserved. She shook my hand instead of hugging me, which I noticed but didn't judge. Not everyone grows up with affection handed out freely. She dressed simply, spoke carefully, like someone who measures her words before letting them go. At first, I tried to give them space. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who hovered, who inserted herself into her son's relationship. I remembered how it felt to be young and in love, how easily advice can sound like criticism. Still, there were moments. Small ones. Little things that tugged at me. Lila never called me by my name. It was always Daniel's mom. She rarely looked me in the eye for long. When I invited them for dinner, she checked her watch often, even when we weren't in a hurry. And when Daniel talked about the future, about buying a house or starting a family, Lila would smile, but it never quite reached her eyes. I told myself I was imagining things. I reminded myself that love looks different on different people, that my role was to support, not to interrogate. When Daniel proposed, he told me over breakfast. He'd come by on a Sunday morning, still sleepy, still my boy in that moment. He slid a small velvet box across the table, grinning like he couldn't contain himself. She said yes, he said. I reached for his hand, felt the warmth of it, the familiar shape. I'm so happy for you, I told him. And I meant it. Even then, we talked about weddings in vague terms. Nothing concrete. Something small, Daniel said. Simple. Just close family. I waited to be included in the details. I assumed I would be. I didn't press. Maybe that was my mistake. Weeks went by. Then months. Whenever I asked gently, "Have you set a date yet?" Daniel would shrug. "We're still figuring things out." Lila would smile that tight smile and change the subject. The first real unease settled in my chest the day I realized Daniel had stopped calling as often. Our long Sunday talks shortened to quick check-ins. He sounded distracted, distant, like his mind was always somewhere else. When I asked if everything was all right, he said yes too quickly. "Just busy, Mom." I told myself to believe him. I told myself a lot of things back then. It wasn't until the day before the call, the day before I learned my son was already married, that I felt something shift so sharply it took my breath away. I had run into Daniel at the hardware store. It was unexpected, the kind of coincidence that usually makes you laugh. But when he saw me, he froze. Just for a second. Long enough for me to notice. We hugged, but his arms were stiff. He glanced toward the exit twice while we talked. I asked about Lila. He said she was fine. Asked about the wedding again, lightly, trying to sound casual. "We'll tell you soon," he said. Soon, I thought, watching him walk away. Soon felt like a door quietly closing. That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle, the familiar creaks and sighs of old wood. I couldn't explain the tightness in my chest, only that it felt like standing outside in the cold without a coat. The next day, I picked up the phone and asked the question I had been holding back. "So," I said gently, "when is the wedding?" And that was when my daughter-in-law told me they had already said their vows. Without me, without a word, without looking back. I stood alone in my kitchen, the smell of broken eggs in the air, realizing that whatever I thought I knew about my place in my son's life had changed forever.